Why then did I devote a chapter in my book to this archaic word legalism? I did it for two reasons. First, the church swings on a pendulum back and forth, and inevitably it will swing back toward legalism and strictness. Just read a little church history. One of my favorite saints, for example, is Saint Peter of Alcantara, who's the patron saint of insomniacs. For 40 years, Peter never slept more than an hour and a half per day. That was how he proved his devotion to God. He did many exercises to keep himself awake all this time, and he lived in a cell only 4.5 feet long so that he could never stretch out. At any point in church history, you can find folks like St. Peter, who literally torture themselves as a sign of their spirituality. You know, that can have the effect of turning people away from God rather than toward Him. Martin Luther, a monk raised in another strict environment, said, "Love God, I hated Him." The second reason to talk about legalism is that Jesus saw it as an important issue. In fact, it's fascinating to compare the sins that we worry about today with the sins Jesus seemed concerned about. We hear a lot about sexual sins, premarital sex, lust, pornography, homosexuality. These are all important, to be sure. But if you look at the Gospels, Jesus had relatively little to say about sexual sins. He had much to say, though, about the sins of pride and hypocrisy and a love of money. And he had a lot to say about legalism. Legalism can seem harmless. What difference does it make if a group of Christians decides to wear all black or use buttons instead of zippers? It may not matter at all, depending on their attitude. Yet Jesus pointed out that their very strictness poses some huge dangers. First, there's the danger of thinking they have arrived. That was Jesus' main complaint about the Pharisees. They felt that if they kept all 613 laws in the Old Testament, then they had gained God's approval. They had arrived. As a result, the Pharisees tended to look down on other people as impure, as less spiritual, as inferior. Legalists can do that.
The old one that I grew up with, which is unmerited favor.
My friend, Dr. Tony Campolo, is never shy about expressing his opinion, especially about the effects of legalism on today's church. A world-renowned evangelical pastor and teacher, he even personally carried the message of God's grace to a recently impeached president.
Well, I have this role as kind of a spiritual counselor to the president as he's come through this very, very difficult time in his life. I have been shocked, absolutely shocked, not just at the president's behavior, but at the reaction of the Christian community to all of this. One of the letters that I received from one of our leading evangelicals in America had a statement that I don't think he read a second time. It read, "This man does not deserve the grace of God." Whoa! How does one deserve the grace of God? I mean, nobody should make a statement like that. It shows a complete disregard to what the biblical message is about. I think that the evangelical community has been so seduced into conservative politics that they have confused their political beliefs with the biblical message. We are all, in the sense, like the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees of old, that take the scriptures and then begin to spell out what that means in detail. And then we begin making very serious judgments about anybody that violates our understanding of the rules.
For 13 years, I attended a church in Chicago that taught me much about grace. An inner city church, it opened its doors on Sunday morning and served breakfast to senior citizens. Sometimes drunks would come in, eat breakfast, and go upstairs into the warm sanctuary where they would stretch out on a pew and snore loudly through the service. Strange characters came to this church. One man liked to throw things. Once he threw a spiral football pass at the pastor just as he was praying over 300 little communion glasses. Another man would pray aloud, prayers like, "Lord, thank you for Whitney Houston and her magnificent body." Somehow, that church found a place for these unbalanced characters, even as various doctors in the church worked hard to regulate their medication. Actually, two churches met in that 100-year-old building. I attended the one on Sunday morning. On Tuesday evening, another group met in the basement, Alcoholics Anonymous. And several times, I attended that group too, with an alcoholic friend. I was blown away the first time I attended AA. They seemed like the New Testament church. They greeted each other with hugs and smiles. They sat around and confessed their sins and told their stories. They prayed to a higher power and pledged to help each other with any problem at any time. If you were tempted to drink at 4 o'clock in the morning, all you had to do was call another AA member and he or she would come to you right away. Every week, they repeated 12 steps together. And as I listened to those 12 steps, they seemed to me to boil down to two big steps. One was radical honesty. These alcoholics and drug addicts could smell a fake a mile away. They learned to be brutally honest about their flaws and failures. The second step was radical dependence. They knew they could not make it through another day without the help of their friends and without the help of God. Each week they confessed their faults and prayed for help. It occurred to me as I sat there listening to the alcoholics and drug addicts that the church upstairs could use a refresher course on those very two steps: radical honesty, radical dependence. It's easy for people to fake it in church. How's it going? Oh, fine, I'm fine. When really a marriage is falling apart, a teenager has run away. Need any help? Oh, no, everything's fine. Several times I asked folks in AA if they had ever thought about coming to our upstairs church on Sunday morning. "Oh, no, we'd never do that," they said. "Why not?" "Well, those people upstairs, they're so together. They dress nice and have families and jobs, and their lives work out. Our lives are a mess. We'd rather sit here in our blue jeans and T-shirts and smoke cigarettes and be honest with each other." In fact, one alcoholic made a poignant observation. He said that in church, if someone comes in late, people turn and stare at the latecomer. Some people scowl, some smile a self-satisfied smile. "See, that person's not as responsible as I am." In AA, though, if a person comes in late, everyone jumps up to greet them. They know that that addict was experiencing temptation to pull away from the group and may have decided to come just at the last minute out of desperation. You see what happens? The church upstairs, as full of grace as any church I know, has somehow communicated, we have it together. Believe me, if your life is totally together, I can think of a lot better ways to spend your time on Sunday morning than going to church. I know of only one good reason to go to church, and that's because I desperately need it. Jesus told a story about two men praying in the temple. One was a righteous man, and he took pride in his superior moral character. "God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of everything I get." He was a legalist, a very good one. The other man was a sinner, and he could barely find the words to pray. "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." You see, the Pharisee was comparing himself to people around him, whereas the tax collector compared himself only to God. The Pharisee rejoiced at being holier than thou. He kept all the rules. The tax collector compared himself not to other people, but to God. He recognized his need for help, his need for grace. He held his hands wide open to receive God's amazing free gift. Jesus left no doubt as to which one God accepted.